Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be with you today. I'm Leslie Kaufman. I'm with Bloomberg Green. Today, we're here to talk about truly an impactful piece of legislation, and you can't say that about a lot of pieces of legislation. We're here to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act. A lot of people think it was misnamed. It's not attacking inflation, but it is a very important climate bill and tool. Already, and these are just some of the statistics we've published, and these are a little old. I'm sure our panel will update us. It's generated $86 billion in private investment, 120,000 clean energy jobs, 91 battery factories, and 51 solar panel plants. And that's, from when we first did it. And that's only a year into the law. So we're going to talk about that in detail. Before we get going, though, I want to remind everyone that you can use the QR code to post questions. So before we begin our discussion, if you want to submit questions to our speakers, we'll get to those at the end of the panel. And we also have a poll, which we'd like you to take part of. How will the IRA implementation most impact your company or industry? And your choices are job creation, cost savings, access to capital, still figuring it out, or no impact. So we'd love to hear what you have to say on that. So to get going, I'm going to ask our panel to introduce themselves. We'll start at that end of the couch with Abigail. But I'd also like you to say, not just your relationship to the IRA, but just to start off, what do you think 1 year in, its biggest impact has been so far? So,
sure.
Yeah.
So hi, everyone. My name is Abby Hopper. I have the privilege of serving as the president and CEO of SEIA, Solar Energy Industries Association. We're the National Trade Association for the solar and storage industry here in the United States. For our industry, this has been transformational. I know we might talk about some of the challenges, but I want to start with the positive. It has been truly breathtaking, the impact it has had on the industry, a 10-year runway, 10 years of certainty, a 10-year investment tax credit and production tax credit. Never happened before in our industry, and that amount of business certainty has allowed companies to plan, make investment decisions, deploy capital in a way that they never have before. And we're seeing that in some of those statistics that you cited.
Victoria, do you want to weigh in here?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Victoria Mills. I'm a managing director at the Environmental Defense Fund, which is a global nonprofit environmental advocacy group. And I lead our work with businesses to align their policy advocacy with their climate goals. And picking up on what Abby said, I think for us, the big takeaway after a year is that the historic investment of the Inflation Reduction Act is producing historic private investment in clean energy and technology. And just a few updates on those statistics. As of the anniversary, Climate Power put out a report, and the total private investment driven by IRA is $278 billion.
Wow, that's a much bigger number.
Creating 170,000 new jobs in 44 states across the economy. Yeah. So that is pretty magnificent track record for the first year. An example here in New York State, you have General Electric announcing a big investment in its Vernova wind turbine manufacturing plant that created 200 new jobs. You have entire new economies developing, the battery belt across the Midwestern and Southern states. So it's just a tremendous response to the private sector, and it comes from that certainty that you mentioned, Abby.
And Basil, do you want to weigh in here from what you're seeing from the New York perspective?
Sure. I actually had $271 billion, so...
The numbers I have to tell you, as someone who looked, and I looked at this a few months ago. The numbers were all over the map. So $7
billion more from yesterday morning.
Okay, good. That's how fast it's going.
Counting.
7 billion.
And counting. So just update your phones later. Basil Seggos, Commissioner of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, also sit as board member on NYSERDA, State Energy Agency, State's Climate Action Council co-chair as well. So helped to draft the law and now pulling it together here in New York State. So IRA passes. It was a major eureka moment just from our perspective as regulators, as people within state government who are trying to figure out how to put the policies together and actually implement them over the course of a year. And you know, you go back 14 months ago without federal money, to the announcement of the IRA, all of a sudden you got CHIPS, the bipartisan infrastructure law, and the IRA, half a trillion dollars, right, over the course of 10 years. Total game changer. So we had been looking simply at our ability to hit our really ambitious climate action targets, right, which are much like the many other states, 80 by 50, and how you decarbonize by that point, and looking at the lack of federal funds,
right,
how much harder that would have been for New Yorkers, for businesses, just for your average taxpayer. It was a total game changer. And we see also the tailwinds created over the course of the last year. You know, the national $271 billion, that impact is being felt here in New York, whether it's the GEs, whether it's the 120 major onshore and offshore renewable projects here in New York State. So we actually see the tailwinds. We're seeing it in the numbers. We're seeing it in the interest that's coming into the state in terms of
Can you give us one
projects.
Specific example of something that couldn't have happened without this but has happened?
Well, listen, I think the interest in solar in New York State was already very strong. The interest in wind in New York State was already very strong. We were able to apply future IRA dollars to existing projects, and the economics actually work out. Now, mind you, we are still in the early days of the IRA.
We're going to get
right?
to that.
That's important to know. So we're still very much in the planning phase of it, even though there's so much activity nationally. But we see the dollars coming our way, providing some security to capital that's going to be needed to fund these projects. And obviously we're dealing with inflation at the same time, but there's an enormous amount of interest right now.
So I want to say one thing that I can say as specific things that are happening because of the IRA, and that really is around manufacturing, which is a huge part of the IRA that sometimes gets lost. There's a whole effort around domestic manufacturing and reshoring supply chains here in the United States, and there have been, as I think you mentioned it, 51 solar manufacturing facilities, 91 storage manufacturing facilities. Those would not have reshored here to the United States without the IRA and the certainty that's provided in it. They've gone to a number of states across the United States. You know, does every announcement going to get built? Probably not. But I already have been to a number of ribbon cuttings, not just groundbreakings, but ribbon cuttings.
That's amazing. 1 year in and you're going to ribbon cuttings. That's moving fast.
Really amazing. It is moving fast. And so I think that is a specific and a specific example of something that would not have happened but for the investments in the IRA.
So now that we've established that this is a pretty transformational act,
yes,
let's talk about what is also the challenges, because here we are a little bit more than a year in. What worries you when you are down on the ground? Victoria, why don't we start with you and we'll do a circle, but when you're concerned, what are you concerned about?
Sure. For me, the things that we're keeping an eye on fall into three buckets: environment, business, and politics. So, you know, from an environmental perspective, this law is all carrot and no stick. And so in order to get the decarbonization and fulfill the potential of achieving a 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, we need to drive complete uptake of these incentives and investments. And that's why we're working so hard, and the whole community is working hard to make sure businesses, not just the ones who are the clean energy producers and the clean tech manufacturers, but the ones on the buy side, the fleets and the renewable energy users and the tech companies and the retailers and the product manufacturers, that they are aware of and actively making the connection between IRA incentives and their ability to meet their net zero goals. So we'll be watching the tons. And so that's the environment bucket. The business bucket it's complicated. It's a big piece of legislation. There are a lot of moving parts. It's tax credits, not grant money, mostly. So you have to do the thing before you get the reward. So in order to demystify some of this and make sure, like, close the awareness gap and demystify it a little bit, EDF and others in the environmental community have created a whole suite of resources. There's IRAtracker.org that tells you for each incentive, where is it in the process of having guidance released. EDF has an Understanding the Inflation Reduction Act hub that takes common use cases for companies, like I want to electrify my fleet. What can I use? I want to buy more renewable energy. How can I access the IRA? I want to make my building more energy efficient. So those resources are available. So business challenges, environmental challenges, and political challenges.
Yeah, say no more.
Since day one, this bill, and regrettably it passed with no Republican votes, but despite the fact that a lot of the money and the incentives are going into red states. But it's been under attack. There's been efforts to repeal it as far as appropriations process. There have been efforts to starve the agencies that are in charge with implementing it. Like, that just has to stop. And so the role of businesses here is to let lawmakers know these are popular programs, that you all want to use them, and that you are relying on them to remain competitive and thrive in the clean energy transition.
Terrific. Basil, do you want to go next? You want to say what worries you, keeps you awake at night?
I guess I would echo everything that was just said, and would add a couple things. Certainly, I would emphasize the politics. I mean, that to me is I think one of the biggest risks long term to this program. One of the other risks is the confusion, I think, that could come from the program with the mix of all the state programs. Right? It's already a complicated federal law, and you've got multiple states with different kinds of incentive programs. So how do we harmonize the federal money with, for example, New York State's existing funding programs and not make it cumbersome and burdensome on the ultimate end user, whether it's a company or if it's an individual taking advantage of incentives? So we've been pushing quite aggressively with the federal government to align their programs with ours when we get grant money, for example, into the state, so that we're not having to adjust our programs for federal dollars while having a different program for the state dollars for ultimately the same outcome, which would be a tax incentive or something else.
Yeah.
So I think that certainly is it. And I will be frank, I think one of the biggest things that keeps me up at night is I don't know that it's enough. I don't want to sound greedy, as excited as we are about this incredible federal investment, game changer. I don't think it's enough. So how many states can pony up the amount of money that's needed at the state level? What more can the feds do in the long run? To the carrot versus stick, right? Many of the states have sticks. We need a federal stick as well. And ultimately, you need something that is comprehensive and unique for the entire country, not just enforcement at various state levels.
Interesting. Okay.
I like
Abby?
the way these two think.
Great minds, great minds.
Yeah, well, I live, work, and breathe in Washington, D.C., so I will echo the political aspect and could talk about it nonstop, but I won't. I will, because I think you two covered it well. I would say two things. One is that, you know, it was so exciting to live, work, and breathe in Washington, D.C. when the IRA passed. And go to the White House and celebrate it all. And then the hard work of implementation began. And there's really like nothing less sexy than working on implementation, right? Like, and like going to like commenting on proposed guidance documents, like that's not a bumper sticker worthy. So the implementation process and talking with the Department of Treasury and talking about, you know, what does domestic guidance look like and what's a manufactured product, and are bolts like structural, you know, structural or not structural, like it is so weedy and so specific and so critically important. And that gives me great anxiety because it has huge implications for our industry, is incredibly technical, and there's sort of this information gap. So
Can I ask you to be specific on that? Like, what's the kind of technical, weedy thing that people
like?
I don't want you to put everyone to sleep. I just want you to try to highlight the.
So, like, the goal that most everyone can agree on is that we want to incent the domestic manufacturing of goods here in the United States. The question is sort of what qualifies as a domestic good, and you know, we know it has to be 40% of the product has to be
Right, some
manufactured here.
Battles.
And sort of what qualifies, and like at what point in the product, and what information do you have to give, and is it all of this couch, or is it just the fabric, or is it these guys too? But if you assemble it here, does that count? Or if you do, you know, like you can see how it gets pretty.
Yeah, I've been watching the battles. They're fascinating.
Yeah,
like if China ships the materials here and you assemble it here, does it count?
Does it count? Right. So that gives me a lot of anxiety. The other thing that that is both the one of the most exquisitely beautiful things about the IRA is the way in which it embodied what I think is one of our country's most wonderful attributes, which is we actually care about other humans. And there are social justice attributes in the IRA, which really have not been a part of our tax policy, in at least our clean energy tax policy in this way. And so in order to get the foundational investment tax credit, you have to have prevailing wage and you have to have apprenticeship programs. There are adders for low-income communities. There are adders for energy communities. And that just wasn't a part of the way that energy tax credits have worked in the past. And then we can talk about all the grant programs. I have a lot of anxiety about whether we are ready to live up to that promise and that sort of commitment we have made to environmental justice communities. And certainly a lot of good work being done, but I don't know that we're going to be able to do that. And so,
is that because there aren't enough people to go into the apprenticeship programs, because we don't know how to do it? I
think there's a lot of reasons. I think sort of depends on the part of the country, right? There's some parts of the country that don't have that infrastructure. There are other parts of the country perhaps where we don't have the right relationships with environmental justice communities, and there's not a history of working together.
So things have been rolling out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
You anticipate in the future it could slow things down? Because it hasn't stopped it to this point.
Ask me that again?
So it hasn't, the social justice didn't seem to stop the first wave. Are you worried that it slows the second wave?
I'm worried that we'll sort of go too quickly over, speak a little bit too much in broad generalities and not actually be too helpful to communities that are the intended recipients.
I see. So you're not worried it's going to roll the energy rollout. You're worried we just won't meet our social justice commitments that are part of that.
Yeah, and I worry it'll be a little bit of we are helping them and not, communities are not being centered at as they should be. Right.
I want to get to the opportunities in law, but I do want to ask you one other question as someone who lives and breathes in Washington. I'm a little this law was designed to eventually win over Republicans. That's what this law was designed to do. And it is, in fact, going into Republican districts. Is that having any political resonance or not?
On the front page of the newspapers or behind closed doors? I would say yes, behind closed doors. That's my job and probably all your jobs as well. When I meet one-on-one with Republican lawmakers and remind them that these investments are coming to their districts and impacting their constituents, they are always excited and always enthusiastic. They are not willing to, make big public statements and get on bipartisan legislation, but they're aware and willing to make sort of commitments to me personally and sort of my industry generally, and they're certainly willing to let us hold fundraisers for them. It's really incumbent upon us to continue to raise the awareness. My goal, my professional goal, is to make it politically impossible for Republicans to vote against clean energy, because it doesn't make any political or economic sense for them to do so.
Well, let's see how that goes. So here we are. I do want to talk about opportunities. So we've talked about what's happened so far. We've talked about some of the challenges going ahead. What are some of the opportunities that you see that have not yet been realized, or where could we go with this if we had, maybe you can tell me what we still need? As you say, we need more federal. So what are the opportunities we're missing, and how do we get there? Let's start with you.
Well, listen, I think the law is big and broad, right? And there's certainly a great deal of opportunity in there. Mentioning the environmental justice components of the law. Just to go back to that, I think that is the greatest opportunity. We see that here in New York. Actually, Justice 40 and the IRA to some degree was based on what New York had already been doing. Ali Zaidi, President's climate advisor, was here in New York before he took that job, so helped us to craft some of these policies here. I think you just look at the city, for example, you look at historically disadvantaged areas in New York City. You look at Sunset Park in Brooklyn, right? Typically an area that with the worst air, most burdens, no job activity. Now you see.
Yeah. Why is
wind
the
going
rent
in
so
there.
high there?
Why is the rent so high? Yeah, right. You see us now with this federal tool and matched up with state resources, being able to reverse the fortunes of that community. And it's not just the state coming in and doing so, it's in fact the community demanding it and being a part of it. So I think when I look statewide and probably nationwide on this, you look at some of the opportunities to bring disadvantaged communities up out of the conditions that they're in right now and empower them. The IRA, matched with really good state programs, is going to change the way that we operate as a country. So I think, to me, that's the greatest opportunity. It was the win behind the IRA. It was the win behind the state's law. And I think if we don't deliver on that, I think it erodes, the backlash on it will erode the support that we need from the base. And it makes it that much harder for us to go in and say to businesses, hey, this makes sense. Or to Republican communities, hey, it's worth the investment here. Look at all the success we're having in these other areas. So we're holding ourselves in New York to that 40% goal. 40% of our investment will be in those disadvantaged communities. So all of the billions of dollars coming into New York State that are federally governed by that, as well as our state law, which requires it, will help to make our cities, our upstate cities as well, many of which are disadvantaged, Buffalo, Syracuse,
Right.
Rochester, change them and take advantage of the manufacturing regrowth with Micron coming into New York as well. So it's all, in a way, we're trying to tie it all together while we're flying the plane, if you will.
It's a lot. I want to go to you next because I know you have some thoughts on this.
So, coming back to your question, what is the IRA for and what was the goal of it? I think I can't speak to what the White House's goal or Congress's goal from an EDF perspective. Why we got behind the Inflation Reduction Act was that it was the most robust effort in decades that to do something serious about climate change, to reduce emission, that could actually get across the finish line and bring co-benefits for environmental justice, for economic development, for competitiveness for businesses. So that's why we went behind it 100%. So, in terms of what the potential is, I think we're going to continue to see that wave of investment. I mean, estimates are in the $3 trillion of the combined investment, private and public, could transform the economy, really accelerate decarbonization. But there's a big but. That's like, we all have to be a part of this. We have to defend the legislation, make sure the agencies are funded, pass additional policies to make it effective, because it's not the IRA in isolation. You need transmission regulation. You need to get the renewable energy onto the grid. You need permitting reform for clean energy facilities. And so that's just making the IRA work. But then how do you get the rest of the emission reductions you need to stay on the path to 1.5 degrees? Well, you need some sticks, and you need regulations at the federal level on power plants. You need truck emission standards and vehicle emission standards. You need methane regulation, and you need really strong state policies like the Cap and Invest program that's being developed here in New York State. So it's a yes and.
It's a yes and. And I'm going to give you a couple minutes to go before we get to our poll and our questions. So
Sure. So I would certainly add my voice to this idea that the IRA is both transformational and a great starting point, right? And as I think about it, I think about, wow, it is going to transform our economy. And when we think about all of this renewable energy and different ways of fueling our fleet and our industry, we have to do things differently, right? And that means that our grid needs to operate differently, and so we need more transmission, and we need a different way of permitting, and that means we need to fuel our homes differently, and so we need different interconnection policy, and we need to operate our homes like virtual power plants, and we need to have different market rules around how homes can operate as batteries and bid into wholesale markets, right? And so there's a whole group of regulations and policy that are additive to the IRA, right? And they're not all just more financial incentives. They're more kind of policy constructs that allow that to happen. And I think that's an important piece of allowing the system to grow. That does get a little weedy, but it's kind of part of, we're talking about energy. It's hard not to get a little weedy. So I think that's one of the opportunities that happen. And the thing I love about the IRA is that it is big enough to include a bunch of different technologies, right? We haven't even talked about hydrogen, which is
Right,
that is a bumper sticker one. Everyone loves to talk about hydrogen, about electric vehicles, right? There's certainly all of these different technologies, all different kind of market segments. Even in mine alone, I'm so I'm so protective of it. Like, residential utility scale. We haven't talked about offshore wind, which is my first true love. But there's all of different kinds of technologies, and so I think that's the other beauty of the IRA and this. But I will hand it back to you so we can get to the questions.
Yeah, well, what we're going to do first is, do we have the poll results? Okay, you want to post those? Okay, so how will IRA implementation most impact your company or industry? Most people say job creation. So job creation's our big winner. Cost savings, nice. Access to capital. No one believes it'll be no impact. Yeah, that's kind of amazing. So everyone agrees that we've got something coming, so that's terrific. Do we want to do a few audience questions? Do you have questions for us?
First one is, the Department of Labor data points to skills gap as a key challenge for successful implementation of IRA-funded infrastructure projects. How can innovative programs or states solve for this problem?
Do you want to take that one? That sounds like a...
Sure, I'll take it quickly. Obviously, we know that there's a skills gap. It's a new industry, a new series of industries in the middle of a transition right now. So I can talk to New York at least.
Yeah.
We put the Department of Labor at the table with us. We brought labor to the table with us when we were crafting the state's climate plan over the course of 2 years. So we know what the skills gaps are. We're investing through the Department of Labor actually to create those training centers and working with labor. Right? Labor has a really important role to play in New York State's plan, at least, to ensure that we're building those jobs of the future and actually bringing those that will be displaced, right, in traditional sectors like oil and gas, into the new economy over the course of the next 10 years.
Okay. Do we want to do another question? We'll have everyone handle one question.
How can we use market forces more?
Well, this sounds like you, Victoria.
How do we use market forces more? I always like to think about how individual action can drive markets. So I would offer 3 calls to action for businesses in the audience. Number 1, use the money. Use the money if you're not already, and if you're still figuring it out, get informed. Use all the resources that are available to make the case internally. Second, defend the Inflation Reduction Act. Let your members of Congress know why this is strategic and important for your business, and tell your stories publicly. And then the third is advocate for the other policies needed to make the market drive decarbonization. And that's all of the ones that I mentioned, plus an economy-wide price on carbon.
And do we have another question? No? Yeah. Okay, did you want to answer that question too on market forces?
So one of the so we have a research department, and one of the interesting pieces of research we do every year is look at corporates that choose to go solar. Not surprisingly, it's gone up every year. And also, to me, not surprising, it's mostly because of price, right? Every consumer, and when I say consumer, I'm speaking of utilities, corporates, and residential consumers, are all going solar because they're saving money, right? And utilities are going renewable because they're saving money. The North Indiana cooperative is not going solar because they've suddenly found environmentalism. They're putting out renewable RFPs because they are saving money. And so, when I hear questions like, how do we use the market better? It is really, how do we educate that you're going to save money if you make these choices? So that's the answer that I would give. And so I agree with you. And then once you add on, we didn't talk about this at all, but one of the pretty significant changes in the IRA is that there is a direct pay option that has happened for the MUSH. I love this term, the MUSH market. Municipalities, and I forget what all the MUSH stands for.
Municipal, university, something, and hospital.
Yeah, schools and hospitals, right? So that whole sector and nonprofits that used to not be able to use tax credits because they don't have tax liability, they are now able to literally get direct money back from the IRS when they make these investments. That is a totally untapped market. And so there's a total unaddressed
Which
customers.
is a great subject.
Yeah.
But I want to thank our panel because our time is up. But I think you were all very informative, and I want to really thank you for being with us.
Thank you.